Adeline Brooks pressed the barrel of a loaded rifle against the chest of a complete stranger and did not flinch. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set. Her eyes had long since stopped producing tears. "You finally came," she whispered. She had rehearsed what she would say when someone eventually found her. She had rehearsed how she would beg, negotiate, or fight. She had imagined a dozen different men standing in that doorway. She had never imagined one who looked as broken as she felt. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel right now and follow every single part of this story to the very end, because I promise you, what happens next will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where in this beautiful country you are watching from tonight. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that doorway. Let's go back to the moment everything changed. The door had not been opened in months. Rowan Mercer could tell by the way it resisted him, swollen from winter moisture. The wood warped and stubborn against its frame. He had to put his shoulder into it twice before it gave. And when it finally swung open, a rush of stale, cold air hit him in the face like a warning he chose to ignore. He stepped inside. The rifle met him at chest height before his eyes had adjusted to the dimness. He froze. His right hand was 3 inches from his own holster, and he did not touch it. Years of trapping in the Montana wilderness had taught him to read situations fast. And what he read in that single breath was this: whoever was holding that gun had been holding it for a very long time. The grip was not the grip of panic. It was the grip of someone who had decided, long before this moment, that they were prepared to use it. "Easy," Rowan said. His voice came out low and flat. The voice he used with spooked animals on a bad morning. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then you'd better start explaining what you are here for." The woman's voice was ragged at the edges, like cloth that had been washed too many times. But underneath the exhaustion, there was iron. He heard it clearly. His eyes adjusted. She was standing 6 feet away, large-framed, broad-shouldered, dressed in a brown wool dress that had seen better decades. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever she'd pinned it with and hung in thick strands around a face that was pale with cold and drawn with something worse than cold. Hunger, maybe, or the particular kind of tired that sleep does not fix. She looked at him the way someone looks when they have already made peace with the worst outcome and are simply waiting to see which version of it arrives. "I bought this property," Rowan said. "Paid $1 for it in Missoula 3 days ago. I have the deed in my coat pocket. I'd like to reach for it if you'll let me." Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise. More like a confirmation of something she had already suspected. "Which side?" "Inside." She gave one short nod. He reached slowly, 2 fingers, and drew out the folded paper. He held it out toward her without stepping closer. She did not lower the rifle to take it. Her eyes dropped to it for exactly 1 second, then came back to his face. "I can read from here," she said. "Open it." He unfolded the deed. She read it from 6 feet away, her lips barely moving. When she finished, something in her shoulders changed. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated than relief. She lowered the rifle. Not all the way. She rested the barrel toward the floor, but kept both hands on the stock, and she looked at him with those exhausted eyes and said the thing that would stay with Rowan Mercer for the rest of his life. "You finally came, ma'am?" He genuinely did not understand. "I've been waiting," she said. "Longer than I should have had to." Rowan looked around the cabin. There was a bedroll near the far wall, a small iron pot hanging cold over an ash-gray fireplace, a stack of firewood that had been rationed down to almost nothing. There were papers on the table, many papers, stacked and ordered with great care. And there was a smell in the room, not unpleasant, just deeply human, the smell of a person who had been surviving in a small space for a long time. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She considered whether to answer. He could see her deciding. "Since October," she finally said. It was now the first week of June. Rowan did the arithmetic without meaning to. 8 months. 8 months alone in a broken-down cabin in the Montana wilderness. Through a winter that had killed 3 men he knew personally. Men with full supplies and sturdy shelter. Alone, he said. Yes, he looked at her differently then. Not with pity. Something in her bearing made it clear that pity would not be welcome and would not be accurate. But with a recalibration, the kind a man makes when he realizes the thing in front of him is considerably more complicated and considerably more significant than he first assumed. "My name is Rowan Mercer," he said. Something cracked open in her expression. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to see that his name meant something to her that it did not yet mean to him. "I know who you are," she said. "You have the advantage of me." Adeline Brooks. She said it like a statement of fact, not an introduction. My husband was Thomas Brooks. He owned the land in the Eastern Valley, the Clearwater parcel. He's been dead since last September. I'm sorry for your loss. Mrs. Brooks. Are you? It was not a question. She said it the way people say things, when they've heard the word so many times they've stopped carrying meaning. What I mean is, what are you doing in my cabin? It's not your cabin, she said. Not in any way that matters. Rowan felt his jaw tighten. He had spent 3 days on horseback to reach this place. He had spent $1 he did not need to spend, because the dollar was a formality, and the land itself was what he'd wanted: isolation. Quiet. A place to put himself where the world would not find him. I have a deed, he said. I know you do. Your father sold it years ago when he needed the money. He sold it to a man named Garrett Holloway, who let it go to a county auction. And then the county sold it to a holding company, and the holding company sold it to you. She paused. Garrett Holloway is the man who killed my husband. The word killed sat in the air between them. What do you mean, killed? I mean, Thomas refused to sell our land to Garrett. The Clearwater parcel sits on top of the only natural spring in the valley. Garrett wanted the water rights. Thomas told him no. She looked down at her hands on the rifle stock. 6 weeks later, Thomas was dead. They called it an accident. A horse throwing him on a trail he'd ridden 100 times. Her voice did not waver. Thomas had ridden that trail 100 times. Rowan did not say anything. I have proof, she said. I have documents that show Garrett has been falsifying land claims across the entire Northern Valley for 11 years. I have letters. I have ledgers that one of his former employees gave me before he disappeared. I came here because this was the one place Garrett doesn't own and cannot reach, not yet. She met Rowan's eyes directly. I came here because your father's papers said you might come back. Eventually, my father's papers. There's a box under the floorboards. She tilted her head toward the far end of the room. 4th plank from the east wall, 3rd from the north. He buried it there before he left. Rowan stood very still. He had not spoken his father's name aloud in 11 years. He had left this land, left Montana, left everything connected to the Mercer family name. And he had done it deliberately and with a completeness that he'd believed. Until this moment was permanent. You read my father's private correspondence, he said. I read what I needed to read to survive, she said. You can be angry about it later. Right now I need to know if you're going to throw me out. He looked at her. The fraying dress, the rationed firewood, the stacked papers she'd spent 8 months protecting. He was angry. He had every right to be angry. He had come here to be left alone. And instead he had walked into someone else's catastrophe and someone else's war. And standing in front of him was a woman who had apparently decided, without asking him, that his arrival was part of her plan. I'm not going to throw you out in June, he said. In Montana. Her chin dropped a fraction of an inch. Just enough. But we need to talk, he said. And I want to see what's in that box. She moved aside and gestured toward the far wall. He crossed the room, crouched down, and counted planks. 4th from the east wall, 3rd from the north, he pressed. And the plank shifted, and beneath it was a box sealed with a rusted latch. He sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long moment before he opened it. Inside were letters, 12 of them, all in his father's handwriting. All addressed to no one, all written in the voice of a man talking to a son who was not there. Rowan read the first one, then the second. He did not read the rest there on the floor. He folded them carefully and put them in his coat pocket. And he stood up, and he did not look at Adeline, because he did not want her to see what his face was doing. "He wrote to you," she said quietly, "even when he didn't know where you were." "He knew where I was," Rowan said. "He just didn't know if I'd come back." She didn't push that. He was grateful. "I'll sleep outside," he said. "You can keep the cabin for tonight. You don't have to." "I want to," he said. And he walked back out the door before she could say anything else. Because the truth was, he needed to stand in the cold air and breathe and let his chest stop doing what it was doing. He unsaddled his horse in the overgrown lean-to beside the cabin. He rubbed the animal down without thinking about it, his hands moving through the familiar motions while his mind was somewhere completely different in those letters. In his father's handwriting, in the image of an old man writing to an empty room. After a while, the cabin door opened. Adeline came out carrying a tin cup of something hot. She walked to the edge of the lean-to and held it out. "Coffee," she said, "or what passes for it. I've been stretching the grounds for 2 weeks." He took it. It was weak and slightly bitter, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in 3 days. "Thank you," he said. She stood there for a moment, not leaving. There was something she was turning over. He could see it. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," she said finally. "I know you came here to be left alone. Your father wrote about that too, that you'd left because you needed quiet. Because something had happened that you needed distance from." She paused. He didn't say what it was. He wouldn't have. "I'm not asking," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm not asking you to fight Garrett Holloway. I'm not asking you to take on someone else's trouble. What I'm asking is simple." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking you not to make me leave. Not yet. Give me until I can get those documents to a federal marshal in Missoula. Give me 60 days and I'll be out of your way, and you'll never have to think about me again. 60 days. He could see her calculating that she had given him the smallest number she thought he might accept. "What makes you think a federal marshal will care?" he asked. "Garrett Holloway sounds like a man with friends." "He does have friends," she said. "He has a judge and 2 sheriffs and a territorial senator who owes him money. But I have 11 years of evidence, and I have names. And I have a letter from that former employee written in his own hand describing what he witnessed." Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the current running underneath it. "What I don't have is a man whose name is on a deed that Garrett can't buy or threaten his way onto. Your property is the only piece in the northern valley that sits outside his reach. As long as you're here, he can't legally touch it. And as long as I'm here with your permission, I'm not trespassing. I'm a lawful guest." Rowan looked at her for a long time. "You thought all of this through," he said. "I had 8 months," she said. "I had a great deal of time to think." He drank the last of the thin coffee. "Handed the back," he said. She exhaled. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I have conditions." "Name them. You tell me everything." "Not the summary. Everything. Every document, every name. Everything you know about Garrett Holloway and what he's done and who helped him. If I'm going to be standing between you and that man, I need to know what I'm standing in front of." She nodded once. "Agreed. And you stop pointing rifles at people without announcing yourself first." The faintest thing crossed her face. Not quite a smile. "I can agree to that," she said. "As long as the people in question stop walking into my cabin without knocking." "It's my cabin," he said. "It was," she said. And she turned and went back inside. Rowan leaned against the lean-to post and listened to the Montana dark around him, the creak of pine in the wind, the distant sound of water, The 10,000 kinds of silence that this particular wilderness produced, and for the first time in 3 days of writing, he felt something other than the numbness he'd grown so accustomed to that he'd started to think it was his natural state. He felt something he did not immediately have a name for. It would be several weeks before he understood that the feeling was interest. Not romantic interest, not yet, but the older, more fundamental kind. The feeling of a mind that has encountered something it cannot immediately categorize and has decided, against all prior intention, to stay and find out what it is. The next morning, Rowan woke before dawn, rebuilt the fire, and had water boiling by the time Adeline emerged from the back room. She was dressed, her hair pinned back, and she was carrying the stacked papers that she set carefully on the table. "Sit down," she said, with the manner of a woman who has organized her evidence many times in her own mind and is now finally going to say it out loud to someone. "I'll start from the beginning." And so he sat down. And she began to talk. Her husband Thomas had come to the Clearwater Valley in 1871, 7 years before, with a modest stake and a particular kind of stubbornness that the valley had eventually rewarded. He found the spring on his 3rd year a natural freshwater source that fed 3 small streams and kept the eastern pastures green through the dry months. He knew immediately what it was worth. He also knew, within the year, that Garrett Holloway knew it too. Garrett didn't come to Thomas directly at first, Adeline said. He sent people, intermediaries, men who made offers and called them generous and acted surprised when Thomas turned them down. She spread several letters across the table. "These are the first 3 offers. See the amounts. See how they increase." Her finger moved along the paper. "And see here the dates. The first offer comes in March of 1875. The second in August. The third in January of 1876. Each one higher than the last." He expected Thomas to wear down, Rowan said. Everyone expected Thomas to wear down. We weren't wealthy. We were comfortable, the land was productive, and we worked hard, but comfortable is not the same as secure. And Garrett knew the difference. Her jaw tightened. He also knew that we had a child. Rowan looked up. "A daughter," Adeline said. "Clara. She was 4 years old when this began. Where is she now?" "With my sister in Billings." She said it without looking at him. "She's been there since September. I sent her before Thomas died. He asked me to." A pause. He knew things were going to get worse before he died. He was trying to protect her from it. Rowan let that sit without commenting. There was nothing to say to it that wouldn't be inadequate. "Go on," he said quietly. When the offers stopped, the trouble started. Small things first: fences cut. Cattle turned loose. A water ditch partially blocked. Thomas reported it to the sheriff. The sheriff wrote it down and did nothing. She touched one of the documents. "This is Thomas's complaint, filed in March of 1876. You can see the sheriff's notation. Case closed, no evidence." Her voice was precise and colorless. "The sheriff's name is Anders Cray. He appears 7 more times in this stack." She walked Rowan through it for 2 hours. She was thorough in a way that impressed him deeply, not just because of the volume of evidence she had compiled, but because of the way she had organized it. She understood what was important and what was noise. She knew how to connect one document to another, how a date in a ledger matched a letter that matched a testimony from a witness who had since disappeared. "Where did you get the ledger?" he asked. "A man named Hugh Pryor. He managed Garrett's books for 6 years. He came to Thomas in secret in the summer of 1877, 2 months before Thomas died, and told him he couldn't continue." She looked at the ledger, worn and soft-cornered from handling. "He gave this to Thomas, and then he left the territory. I have not heard from him since." "He could be dead," Rowan said. "He could be," she agreed, "but the ledger exists. His letter exists, and his handwriting can be verified." She looked at Rowan directly. Garrett Holloway has been filing false land claims under 12 different names, collecting federal land grants for properties he does not own, and using the water rights from those properties to control every ranch in the Northern Valley. Every rancher who buys water from him is paying money that belongs to people who don't know they've been robbed. She let that land. It runs to tens of thousands of dollars, Mr. Mercer. Possibly more. Rowan leaned back in his chair and looked at the stack of papers. And you've been sitting in this cabin with all of it, he said. Yes, for 8 months. Yes, she met his eyes. I told you. I had to wait for someone with a legal claim to the property. Someone Garrett couldn't simply remove. She folded her hands on the table. Your name is on a deed. That deed is registered in Missoula County. There is nothing Garrett can do about that without a court proceeding that would draw exactly the kind of attention he cannot afford to have drawn to him right now. He'll find another way, Rowan said. Men like Garrett always find another way. I know, she said. That's why I need 60 days. Not because the evidence isn't ready, it's ready. But getting it to a federal marshal safely, without Garrett intercepting it, requires planning. She looked at him steadily. And I've been alone for 8 months. I need help, Mr. Mercer. I need someone who can ride. Who knows the territory, who won't break under pressure. She paused. Your father's letters say you were all of those things. My father wrote those letters years ago, Rowan said. Are they wrong, she asked. He did not answer immediately. He looked at the stack of papers. He thought about his father. Alone in this cabin, writing letters to a son who had vanished. He thought about a woman on her own, through a Montana winter, keeping evidence alive that could bring down a man who had taken everything from her. He thought about the $1 he had paid for this property, how he had thought of it as a formality, a symbol of choosing to disappear completely from the world. They're not wrong, he said finally. Something moved in her expression. Not triumph, something quieter than that. Something that looked, for the first time since he'd walked through that door, like the beginning of trust. Then we have work to do, she said. We do, he agreed. He picked up the first document in the stack. He began to read. Outside, the Montana moved across the mountain in long golden lines. And the cabin, the broken, forgotten, $1 cabin that everyone else had written off as worthless, held 2 people who had each, in their own way, believed they were done. Done with fighting. Done with hoping. Done with trusting that the world had anything left to offer them that wasn't grief. They were both wrong about that. But neither of them knew it yet. Garrett Holloway's men were already asking questions in town. Already someone had mentioned seeing a light in the window of the old Mercer property. Already a name was being passed along a chain of whispers that would eventually reach a man who did not like surprises and did not forgive them. But in the cabin, for now, there were only documents. And a woman who had refused to stop fighting, and a man who had come here to be finished with the world and had instead found, sitting across a rough wooden table from him, the first thing in 11 years that made him want to stay awake. He read until the light changed. She answered his questions with a precision that told him she had prepared for every one of them. When he pushed on a detail, she produced the document to support it. When he challenged an interpretation, she walked him through the logic without raising her voice or losing her patience. At no point did she ask him to feel sorry for her. At no point did she perform helplessness. She sat across that table and laid out the evidence of her husband's murder and the destruction of her life with the calm, controlled manner of someone who understood that what mattered now was not the grief. The grief was real and enormous, and she had already carried it alone for months, but the action. The next step. The document to the marshal. The legal proceeding. The end of Garrett Holloway's reign over the Northern Valley. Rowan, who had spent 11 years insisting he did not care about anything, found himself caring. He did not announce this, he simply read the next document. When the light finally faded and Adeline rose to rebuild the fire, She moved around the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who had made herself at home in it through necessity, not comfort. She knew where everything was. She had organized the small space so that nothing was wasted. Nothing was duplicated. Everything served a purpose. Watching her, Rowan thought about what 8 months of solitude in a Montana winter actually meant. The cold, the isolation, the endless sound of wind, the ration of firewood, the stretched coffee grounds, the weight of carrying that stack of documents and knowing that if something happened to her, the evidence died with her, and Garrett Holloway walked free. And Thomas Brooks died for nothing. He thought about all of that. And then he looked at the woman who had survived all of it, who was now calmly stirring a pot that smelled like dried beans and something more. Something she'd managed to make out of ingredients that should not have produced that smell. And he thought, this woman is extraordinary. He did not say it. He was not a man who said things like that, especially not to strangers. Especially not on the first day. But he thought it. "I'll fix the roof tomorrow," he said. "I noticed 2 places this afternoon where the snow damage looks bad." She looked up from the pot. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to," he said. "I want a roof over my head. It has nothing to do with being generous. A beat." "All right," she said. "There's also a section of the north wall where the chinking has fallen out. The wind comes straight through it. I'll look at it," he said. She nodded, turned back to the pot. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Without looking at him. "Rowan," he said, "if we're going to be living in the same cabin—" "We may as well, Rowan," she said. And something about the way she said his name, not warmly, not formally, just with the simple plainness of person speaking a word that belongs in the room, made him stop talking. "For the 60 days. Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't point that rifle at me again. This time." She did smile, small and quickly gone but real. "I make no promises," she said. He almost smiled back. He stopped himself, but the impulse was there. And that alone was something he hadn't expected. He put the documents back in their careful order. He set them at the edge of the table where she had kept them. He stood up and stretched his back and looked around the cabin that was his by deed and hers by 8 months of hard-won survival. And he said nothing more that night, but he did not sleep outside. He slept on the floor by the door, his rifle within reach, his ears tuned to the sounds outside, because Garrett Holloway's men were asking questions in town. And the woman sleeping in the back room of this cabin had evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in the northern Montana Valley. And Rowan Mercer, who had come here to disappear, had instead agreed to stand between her and the storm that was already moving toward them. He lay in the dark and listened to the mountain. He was not sure when he had stopped wanting to be alone. He was not sure it mattered. What mattered was that he was here. What mattered was that she had waited. What mattered was the stack of documents on the table. And the name Garrett Holloway, and the 60 days ahead of them that would determine whether justice was even possible in a valley where a corrupt man had long since decided that it wasn't. Rowan closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. And somewhere in the early hours of that summer morning, while Adeline Brooks finally slept deeply for the first time in 8 months, because there was finally someone at the door, Rowan Mercer made a decision that he did not formalize or announce, that he simply settled into as quietly as a man settling into a purpose he had forgotten he was capable of feeling. He was going to see this through, not for 60 days. All the way through, the morning after Rowan Mercer decided to stay, Garrett Holloway's man rode into the nearest town and asked 3 questions. Who bought the old Mercer property? How much they paid? And whether they'd been seen going up the mountain road. The man asking the questions was named Dylan Voss Lean. Quiet, with the particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who are paid to watch and report rather than to act. He had worked for Garrett for 4 years. He was good at his job because he looked ordinary. Nobody remembered him after he left a room. He got his answers inside of an hour. By nightfall, the information was in Garrett Holloway's hands. Rowan did not know any of this yet. What Rowan knew on that second morning was that the cabin roof had 3 bad sections, not 2, and that the north wall's missing chinking let in a wind that had no business being that cold in early June. He also knew that the woman sleeping in the back room had given him more to think about in 12 hours than he'd had to think about in the previous 11 years combined. He was on the roof before sunrise. Adeline woke to the sound of him moving above her head, the careful, deliberate footsteps of a large man who understood that old wood required respect, and she lay still for a moment listening to it. And something in her chest did something complicated that she chose not to examine too closely. She got up. She rebuilt the fire. She made what passed for breakfast from what remained in her supplies, which was not much, and she set a plate near the ladder without calling up to him, because she suspected he was not a man who appreciated being called to meals like a child. He came down 20 minutes later, looked at the plate, looked at her, and sat down without a word and ate everything on it. "I'll need to go into town," he said when he finished, "for supplies and proper roofing material. What I've got won't hold through another winter." "Garrett has eyes in town," she said immediately. "I know." He set the plate aside, "which is exactly why I should go. A man buying supplies for a property he legally owns is unremarkable. A man hiding on a mountain is interesting." She considered this. He was right, and she didn't like that he was right, because it meant she had been thinking about the situation as someone hiding. He was already thinking about it differently. He was thinking about it as someone who belonged there. "Don't ask about me," she said. "Don't mention my name. If anyone asks why you're fixing up the property, say you're planning to winter there." "That's ordinary enough." "It is." He stood, reached for his coat. "Is there anything you need that isn't on my list?" She started to say no, then stopped herself. "Thread," she said. "Brown if they have it. And if the general store carries them, any newspapers from the last month." He nodded once and went out. She listened to the sound of his horse until she could no longer hear it. Then she sat down at the table and put her hands flat on the stack of documents and breathed. She had spent 8 months telling herself that once someone arrived, she could rest. She had not anticipated how frightening it would feel to actually depend on another person again. After Thomas died, after she sent Clara to Billings and came to this cabin alone, she had sealed something in herself, some part that required other people, that went soft in the presence of kindness, and she had sealed it because sealing it was the only way to survive. Now a stranger was riding down the mountain to buy roofing nails and thread, and her chest was doing complicated things, and she did not like it. She opened the ledger and went back to work. Rowan made it to town in just under 2 hours. Dillian Voss watched him arrive from the window of the saloon, took note of everything: the horse, the saddlebag, the unhurried way the man moved, the way his eyes swept the street before he dismounted and kept watching. Rowan went to the general store. The storekeeper, a round-faced man named Aldous, was glad enough for the business and asked the usual questions. "Just passing through or settling in?" "Settling," Rowan said. "Bought the old property up past the ridge, the Mercer land." Aldous's face did a thing, a small tightening, just for a moment, before he recovered and said, "Well, that was good land, good elevation, plenty of timber." Rowan noted the tightening and filed it. "Mercer land's been empty a long time," Aldous said carefully, measuring out nails. "Nobody's been up there since old Walter passed." "I know it," Rowan said. "That's why I bought it cheap." "You related to Walter Mercer?" "His son." Another small thing moved across the storekeeper's face. Rowan was beginning to understand that his father's name carried weight in this town, and not the comfortable kind. "Well," Aldous said. "Welcome back, then." He said it the way people say things they don't entirely mean. Rowan paid for his supplies: roofing material, food stocks, thread, and a month's worth of coffee that would not need stretching, and loaded everything without rushing. and when he turned to leave, a man was standing in the doorway of the store. He was in his mid-40s, well-dressed in the manner of someone who wants their money to be visible without being gauche about it. He had an easy smile and eyes that did not match it. "You're Walter Mercer's boy," the man said. It was not a question. "I heard you were back. News travels fast," Rowan said. "In a small valley it does." The man extended his hand. "Garrett Holloway. I own the Double H Ranch, southern half of the valley. Your neighbors, more or less." Rowan shook the hand. He kept his face completely neutral.
"Rowan Mercer," he said.
"I know." Garrett's smile stayed right where it was. "I knew your father, good man. Tragic, the way he ended up alone up there. That property running to ruin." A pause calibrated for sympathy. "I made him a few offers over the years. He never wanted to sell." "No," Rowan said. "He wouldn't have. Well, if you're planning to work the land yourself, I wish you luck. It's good country. But if you ever find it's more than you want to manage, if you decide mountain living isn't for you, come find me." Another easy smile. "I'd pay fair market value, more even given the history." "I'll keep that in mind," Rowan said. He walked past Garrett Holloway and out the door and did not look back. And he felt the man's eyes on him all the way to his horse. He rode back up the mountain with his jaw set and something cold moving through his thinking. Garrett had known he was there inside of a day. That meant someone in the county records office, or someone at the auction house, or someone on the road, someone in the chain between the deed being filed and Rowan arriving at the property was reporting to Garrett Holloway. That meant Garrett's reach was longer than even Adeline's documents had suggested. And that meant 60 days might be more optimistic than either of them had calculated. He pushed the horse faster. When he came through the cabin door, Adeline looked up from the table and read his face before he said a word. "What happened?" she said. "I met Garrett Holloway." She stood up. "Where general store?" "He was waiting for me." Rowan set the supplies down. "He knew who I was. He already knew I'd bought the property. He made an offer to buy it from me, casual, friendly. Like he was doing me a favor." Her face had gone very still. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd keep it in mind." "Good," she said. "That was the right answer." "I know it was the right answer." He looked at her. "He's faster than I expected. I was there one morning and he found me before I left town." "Who's his man? Who watches for him?" She pulled out a page from the stack. "A man named Dylan Voss. He's thin, quiet, forgettable looking." "He's saloon window," Rowan said. "I noticed him." "I didn't know who he was. Now you do." She slid the paper across the table. "Voss has been Garrett's eyes for 4 years. He doesn't do anything himself, he just watches and reports. But if Voss saw you with someone, if he saw you buying supplies for more than one person—" "I bought for one," Rowan said. "I thought of that." She stopped. She looked at him with something that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. "You thought ahead," she said. "I think ahead," he said simply. "It's kept me alive a long time." She sat back down. Her hands were not quite steady, and she pressed them flat on the table to still them. He noticed, but did not comment. "He'll come up here," she said. "Not now, not yet. He'll wait to see what you do. He'll want to know if you're going to be a problem or just a man who bought land and wants to be left alone." She looked up. "Which is what you actually wanted." "Which is what I actually wanted," he agreed. He sat down across from her. "Tell me what happens when he decides I'm a problem." "He has 2 sheriffs," she said. "Anders Cray in Millhaven and Frank Deeds in the northern township. Either one of them can manufacture a reason to come onto your property, a complaint, a disputed boundary, anything. Once they're here, they can search, confiscate, arrest." She touched the stack of documents. "If these disappear, everything disappears." "Then they can't disappear," Rowan said. "That's why I need 60, Adeline." He said her name directly. And she stopped. "I told you last night I'd see this through." "I meant it. What I need from you right now is not a reassurance that you have a plan. I know you have a plan. I need to understand every weakness in it so we can fix them before Garrett finds them first. She looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said. Where are the documents most vulnerable? In transit. Getting them from here to Missoula without Garrett intercepting them. He controls the main road. Through the valley he has men at 2 points who watch the traffic. Anyone carrying papers, anyone who looks like they're moving in a hurry, gets stopped. What about the southern pass? She hesitated. It's longer, harder terrain, and it goes through Clearwater territory, my husband's old land, which Garrett now effectively controls. Effectively, Rowan said. Not legally. Not legally, she confirmed. He's been operating the property under a false claim since last October. That's actually one of the clearest violations in the ledger. The Clearwater transfer documents are forged. And I can prove it because I have the originals. She pulled a specific set of papers from the stack. Thomas kept copies of everything. He knew even at the beginning that if he didn't protect himself with paper, paper would be used against him. Rowan looked at the documents she'd placed before him. Thomas Brooks had been a careful man, a thorough man. A man who had seen what was coming and done everything in his power to document it. And it hadn't saved him. Who else knows you're here? Rowan asked. No one. My sister knows I'm somewhere in the mountains. I wrote her before I came. Before the pass is closed. I didn't tell her specifically where. I didn't want that information near Clara. Clara, he said quietly. She's 5 now. Adeline's voice was controlled, but her hands pressed harder against the table. She thinks I'm coming to get her when the work is done. And you are, Rowan said. She looked at him. Something raw moved across her face. For just a moment, the kind of thing you see in a person when they have been bent so long that the slightest suggestion they don't have to be quite so strong right now nearly breaks them open. She pulled it back, breathed. Yes, she said. I am. Then let's figure out how to get these documents to Missoula, he said. Without using the main road, without triggering Voss, and without giving Garrett any reason to move before we're ready. They worked for the rest of the afternoon. Rowan had traveled extensively through the Montana wilderness. Over 11 years of trapping, he knew terrain. He knew passes, he knew which routes were known and which were not. He spread what he could recall of the Northern Valley's geography across the table in words and rough sketches. And Adeline matched what she knew from Thomas's years of riding the Clearwater land. And together they built a picture neither of them could have managed alone. The southern pass was viable. Difficult, but viable. 4 days on horseback through rough country, skirting the edge of the Clearwater land without crossing it. Coming down into the Missoula approach from the west. Rowan knew a man in that part of the territory, another trapper. Taciturn and trustworthy, who owed him a debt of the kind that did not expire. How soon can we move, he asked. The documents aren't ready yet, she said. I need to write a summary, a clear, organized account that a federal marshal can read without needing to understand the entire stack. Something that tells the story from the beginning, names the crimes and the evidence, and makes the case so plain that he can't dismiss it. She paused. That will take me a week, maybe 10 days. Then that's what you do, he said. I'll finish the roof, reinforce the walls, make sure this place looks like a man setting up for the long term. Ordinary, unremarkable, he looked at her directly. Can you write that summary without anyone in town knowing? I have paper. I have ink. Good. They fell into a silence that was different from the silences of the previous day, less wary, more purposeful. The silence of people who have divided a task and are each running their part of it through their minds. After a while, Adeline said, without looking up from the page she was already beginning to draft, You knew not to mention me in town. I knew not to give Garrett more information than he already had, Rowan said. That's not sentiment, that's strategy. I know it is, she said. I'm not saying it was sentiment. I'm saying you thought about it. And you got it right. A pause. Your husband trained you well, Rowan said. To think this way. She didn't look up. Thomas was smart, she said quietly. But the documenting, the planning, the understanding of how men like Garrett operate, that was me. Thomas was a good farmer and a brave man, but he was not. Started again more carefully. He trusted people. He thought that doing the right thing would protect him. He thought that being honest and working hard would be enough. Her pen paused on the page. It wasn't enough, no, Rowan said. It rarely is. You don't trust people, she said. It was an observation, not a criticism. Not easily, he said. But you trusted me enough to stay. He considered this. I trusted the evidence, he said. You had documents. You had a system. You weren't asking me to believe a story, you were showing me a record. He leaned back. That's not trust. That's assessment. She set her pen down and looked at him directly. All right, then. I'll accept assessment a beat. Why did your father sell this property? The letters didn't say. It was the question he'd been waiting for since he'd read those letters. He'd known it was coming. He'd spent the better part of the previous night deciding how much to answer. He needed money, Rowan said. After I left, the property was too much for one man. He couldn't work it, couldn't maintain it. He sold the deed, but kept the right to live there. That was the arrangement with the holding company. They didn't want an old man evicted, and they didn't particularly care what happened to the property as long as they owned the paper. Why did you leave? She asked. The silence stretched. That's not part of our arrangement, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and picked up her pen. He respected that she didn't push. He found himself respecting a great many things about Adeline Brooks that he had not expected to respect about anyone. The days that followed built themselves into a rhythm. Rowan worked the cabin from first light roof walls, the collapsed section of the lean-to, a new door latch. A dozen small repairs that each made the structure more solid and the living more bearable. He was methodical and thorough, and he worked the way men work when they are glad to have something physical to do while their minds are occupied elsewhere. Adeline wrote. She worked at the table for long hours, drafting and revising the summary with a precision that sometimes drove her to crumple a page and start again entirely. She organized the supporting documents in the order a reader would need them. She cross-referenced the ledger entries against the land claim documents and the letters and produced a chronology that a blind man could follow. They ate together in the evenings. They talked not warmly, not yet, but efficiently, honestly, in the manner of people who are building something together and have agreed, without saying so, to be useful to each other. On the fourth day, Rowan came in from outside with an expression that Adeline had already learned to read. Because it was the expression he wore when something had happened that required rerouting. Rider on the road below, he said. Didn't come up. Just went slow looking. She didn't reach for the rifle. But her hand moved toward it. Voss? Could be. Wrong build for the man you described, but I was too far to be certain. He sat down. He didn't come up the trail, he just looked. That's worse, she said. If he came up, it would mean he wanted something. Looking means he's marking the place, confirming someone's here, which they already know, Rowan said. Confirming more than one someone, she said quietly. They looked at each other across the table. I haven't been visible from below, she said. I know not to be. I know you do. He rubbed the back of his neck. But someone may have talked in town. The storekeeper Aldous, he reacted when I mentioned my father's name. Someone could have said something, heard something, put something together. How much time do you think we have? She asked. Before Garrett decides to come himself. 2 weeks. Maybe. He'll want more information first. He's a careful man. Rowan looked at the table. How close are you to finished? 4 days, she said. Maybe 5. Good, we move in 6, her chin came up. The marshal's office in Missoula. I need to go myself. The documents need to be presented in person, explained. The evidence walked through. It can't just be a package delivered by a stranger. I know that, he said. We both go. The carrot can have the cabin, Rowan said flatly. Once those documents are in federal hands, the cabin doesn't matter. The property doesn't matter. What matters is the case. She stared at him. You'd give up the property, she said. Just like that. It's a building, he said. Adeline. It's wood and chinking and an old floor. It matters a great deal less than what's in those papers. He looked at her steadily. My father is already gone. What he left behind isn't this place. It's the fact that the right thing needs doing, and someone has to do it. That's all these letters say, when you read them all the way through. He paused. I read them all last night. She was very still. All 12, he said. She looked down at her hands on the table. When she looked back up, her eyes were doing something she clearly did not want them to do. And she held it together through the particular discipline of a woman who has had a great deal of practice not crying in front of people. He was a good man, she said. Your father, in those letters, he was a good man. I know, Rowan said. I should have come back sooner. Yes, she said simply. You should have. He accepted that without flinching. They worked through the 5th day with a quiet urgency that didn't need to be spoken. Adeline finished the summary and read it aloud to Rowan, 6 careful pages that laid out Garrett Holloway's crimes with a clarity and specificity that left no room for doubt. Rowan asked 2 questions. She answered them. He told her it was the most clearly argued document he had ever heard. And he had heard a few, and she heard the honesty in it, and something loosened in her face. It'll be enough, he said. It has to be, she said. On the 6th morning, they were up before dawn, packing only what they needed, the documents wrapped in oilcloth, secured in a saddlebag that stayed on Adeline's person. Their supplies minimal, their route planned. They were going to travel light and fast and quiet. And if everything went right, they would be in Missoula in 4 days. If everything went right. Rowan was saddling his horse in the lean-to when he heard it. Not hoofbeats, he would have heard those sooner. What he heard was the particular sound of men moving through brush on foot. The sound of people who do not want to be detected but are not quite careful enough. The sound that every man who has spent years in the wilderness learns to recognize instantly because it is always significant. He was back through the cabin door in 10 seconds. Adeline was at the table, tying the oilcloth around the last bundle of documents. She looked up at his face and went completely still. How many? She said. 4, maybe 5. On foot coming up from the east side, she was already moving, not panicking. Not scrambling, but moving with the focused speed of someone who has mentally rehearsed this exact moment for 8 months. She had the saddlebag over her shoulder before he finished the sentence. The rifle, she said. I have it, he said. There's something else. He looked at her directly. There's a voice I recognized, calling low to the others. He paused. It wasn't Voss. She waited. It was Garrett Holloway himself, Rowan said. Something moved through her face then, not fear exactly, but the full, cold recognition of what it meant that Garrett had come himself. In person, before dawn, with men on foot rather than on horseback, moving quietly up the east face of the property. This was not a visit. This was not a warning. Garrett Holloway had come to make sure there was nothing left to find. Back door, Rowan said. There is no back door, she said. There is now, he said. I put one in on the 3rd day. North wall, behind the woodstack. He watched her face change as she understood. And said, I told you, I think ahead. He moved the woodstack himself 4 seconds. No wasted motion, and the door was there, narrow and crude and absolutely functional. He went through first, checked the tree line, saw nothing moving. Now, he said. She came through and he was beside her. And they moved into the trees together with everything that mattered contained in a saddlebag pressed to Adeline Brooks' side. 8 months of survival. 11 years of her dead husband's careful documentation. The legal destruction of Garrett Holloway's empire. And the answer to a question that a lonely mountain man had been trying to outrun for more than a decade. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Garrett Holloway stepped inside. He found a fire that was still warm and 2 plates that had not been used yet, and a table with nothing on it. And he understood in that moment, with a fury he worked very hard to keep off his face, that the woman he had spent 8 months believing was hiding had not been hiding at all. She had been waiting, and now she was gone. And the man who had bought this property for $1, the man Garrett had dismissed as an easy obstacle, had built a door in a wall, and thought ahead, and taken her out of reach before the sun came up. Garrett stood in the empty cabin and breathed through his nose for a long moment. Then he said quietly to the men behind him, "Find them." They moved fast and they moved quiet, and for the first 2 hours, neither of them said a word that wasn't necessary. Rowan led. Adeline followed 3 steps behind, matching his pace with a steadiness that told him she had physical endurance she hadn't needed to demonstrate until now. The saddlebag was across her body, both arms holding it close, and she did not once ask him to slow down or to explain where they were going. She simply moved. That, more than anything, told him who she was. The east approach, where Garrett's men had come from, was behind them. Rowan had taken them northwest first, into the heaviest tree cover, then curved south in a long arc that would eventually bring them to the horses he'd left tethered below the ridge the night before. He'd done it deliberately. That night moved the horses down after dark. Told himself it was practical. Told himself a good trapper always positioned his exit before he needed it. He had not let himself think too hard about why he'd been more careful than usual. Now he was glad he hadn't thought too hard. They reached the horses. Adeline checked the saddlebag's ties before she mounted, fingers moving with quick precision, and then she was up and ready before he'd finished checking his own cinch. "South Pass," South Pass, he confirmed. "Garrett's men are on foot. They can't cover enough ground before we're clear of the valley." He looked at her. "You all right? Ask me something harder," she said. He almost smiled. He turned his horse south. They rode hard for the first 3 hours, putting distance between themselves and the cabin with a kind of folks efficiency that leaves no room for anything except the next mile and the mile after that. When Rowan finally pulled up to let the horses breathe in a shallow draw, Adeline came alongside him, and they sat without speaking for a moment, listening. Nothing behind them, nothing moving that shouldn't be moving. "He came himself," she said. Her voice was steady, but he heard what was under it, the particular weight of understanding what it means when a man like Garrett Holloway decides something is worth his personal attention. "He came himself," Rowan confirmed. "That means he knows," she said. "Not suspects, knows. Someone told him about the documents, not just that I was in the cabin, but that I had something worth destroying." Rowan had been thinking the same thing since the moment he'd heard Garrett's voice in the dark. "Who knew about the documents, besides you and Thomas?" "Hugh Pryor," she said immediately. "He gave us the ledger. He knew what Thomas was building. And Pryor is gone. Or," she stopped. "Or Garrett found him first," Rowan said. She stared at the middle distance for a moment. If Garrett found Pryor and learned what was in that ledger, he would have been searching for me since October. Since before Thomas died even. Her jaw tightened. "I thought I had more time. I thought coming to the cabin a property didn't own would buy me time." "It did buy you time," Rowan said. 8 months of it. And now we don't need more time. We need Ford at him. He'll have men on the roads, not the South Pass. Not yet. He doesn't know which way we went. Rowan gathered his reins. But he'll figure it out. So we moved, they rode. By midday, they had cleared the edge of what Adeline recognized as Clearwater territory, the land that had been Thomas's land, that Garrett had claimed in Thomas's death, with forged documents and a cooperative sheriff. She didn't say anything when they passed through it. But she sat differently for that hour, her spine straighter. Her face pointed precisely forward, and Rowan gave her the privacy of not looking at her directly. They stopped to water the horses at a creek that ran cold and fast from the high country. Adeline dismounted and crouched at the bank, and while she cupped water to her face, Rowan watched the tree line out of habit, still clear. "Tell me about your daughter," he said. She looked up, surprised by the question. Then she sat back on her heels and said, "Clara is the reason any of this matter pause. She looks like Thomas. Same coloring, same way of tilting her head when she's thinking about something. She's going to be a determined woman, like her mother," Rowan said. "I don't know if that's a compliment in the way you mean it," she said. "It is," he simply. She was quiet for a moment. "When this is over, when Garrett is in front of a federal court, and the valley is free and I can go to Billings and bring her home, I don't know yet where home is." She stood, brushed off her skirt. "The Clearwater land is legally ours. But I don't know if I can live there again, with Thomas gone," she said it matter-of-factly. But the matter-of-fact tone cost her something. "You don't have to decide that now," Rowan said. "No," she agreed, "but I think about it." They remounted and rode. The afternoon passed in stretches of focused silence broken by practical exchanges: the route, the terrain, the pace, whether to push on or make camp before dark. They decided to push. The South Pass had a difficult section that was better navigated in daylight, and they wanted to be through it before they stopped. Rowan was wrong about two things that day. He was wrong about how quickly Garrett would figure out which direction they had gone. And he was wrong to assume that Garrett's only resource was the men he'd brought to the cabin. He discovered the first mistake at the top of the South Pass. There were two riders on the ridge. He saw them before they saw him, just barely. The difference of a man who had spent 11 years reading country for his survival. He pulled up hard, threw his arm back to stop Adeline, and they both went still in the tree shadow. The riders were moving slowly along the ridgeline, looking down into the pass. They weren't Garrett's personal men, different horses. Different build, hired out of somewhere else, positioned in advance. Rowan's mind ran through the geometry of this very quickly. Garrett had not simply followed them this morning. Garrett had anticipated the South Pass as a possible exit and staged men there before he even came to the cabin. That meant Garrett had been planning this for longer than one morning. That meant Garrett had not come to the cabin on impulse. He had come when he was ready, when his exits were already covered, when he believed he had accounted for every way out. He had not accounted for Rowan building a door in the north wall. But he had accounted for almost everything else. Rowan backed his horse carefully into deeper cover and came alongside Adeline. "Two men on the ridge," he said, voice barely above breath. "Blocking the pass." Her face did not change. "How long have they been there?" "Long enough. They were in position before we arrived." She understood what that meant at the same second he did. He could see it land on her face, the realization that this was not a reaction to their escape, but a planned containment. "He has the main road," she said quietly. "He has the South Pass. If he thought of the Eastern Trail, he doesn't know the Eastern Trail," Rowan said. "That's old trapper country. It's not on any map Garrett would have. You know it? I know every inch of it. I ran traps on that ground for 6 years. He was already thinking ahead. Restructuring. But it adds 2 days to the journey. 3 if the upper section is rough. Then it adds 3 days," she said. He looked at her. "It will be hard going, Mr. Mercer." She held his gaze without blinking. "I spent 8 months alone in a cabin in a Montana winter on stretched coffee and dried beans. I can manage 3 days of hard going." He turned his horse. "Stay close," he said. "I haven't left your side yet," she said. They moved back down from the ridge and cut east, deep into country that Rowan navigated by memory and instinct, and the particular kind of knowledge that lives in a man's muscles rather than his mind. He moved with confidence that she trusted, following without hesitation. And he was aware of her trust in a way that he felt rather than thought about, a warmth that sat alongside the urgency without interfering with it. They made camp that night deep enough in the back country that no one who didn't know exactly where to look would find them. A small fire, just enough for warmth. Adeline checked the documents by firelight, each page, each seal, each stack, with the focused attention of someone who has had nightmares about arriving and finding the pages blank. "They're all here," she said, like she needed to say it aloud. "They were always going to be there," he said. "You can't know that," she said. "I was with them every minute since we left," he said. "So yes, I can." She looked at him across the small fire. She had been looking at him differently since that morning, since the north wall door, since the horses positioned in the dark, since the moment she'd understood that he had been planning her escape, even while he was telling himself he was just being practically minded. She had been looking at him like someone recalibrating, like a woman revising an estimate upward. "Why did you leave Montana?" she said. 11 years ago. The fire shifted. He watched it. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "But I'm asking honestly. Not because I need leverage or because I'm curious in a small way. I'm asking because I've spent 6 days with you, and I understand how you think, and I don't understand why a man like you runs from anything." He was quiet for long enough that she might have thought he wasn't going to answer. "I was engaged to be married," he said, "a woman in Missoula. Margaret Hale. Her father ran a freight business. She was a good person. Kind. Patient." He turned the words over like he was checking them for accuracy. "I was 24. I thought I knew what I wanted. I came home early from a trapping run. 3 weeks early. The season had been bad, and I saw no point in staying." He paused. "She was with someone else, someone her father preferred. A man with a business and prospects and a settled address." He said it without heat, without residual bitterness, the way a man talks about something that hurt him so completely that the wound scarred over and became just geography. She didn't apologize. She said she hadn't expected me back so soon. "She said she hoped I understood, and you left," Adeline said. "I left," he said. "I left because staying felt like a choice to be made small. To be the kind of man that things happen to, rather than the kind of man who decides." He looked up from the fire. "It was the wrong reason. I know that now. You don't run from something and call it a decision." She considered this for a moment. "No," she said. "You don't. But you came back." "I came back for $1 worth of land and some peace and quiet," he said. "I didn't come back for any of this, and yet," she said. And yet he agreed. The fire settled. Somewhere in the high country an owl asked its single question over and over into the dark. "Thomas ran toward things," she said after a while. "That was his nature. He saw a problem and he moved straight at it. It was admirable, and it was the thing that killed him. Because Garrett Holloway is not a problem you can move straight at." She was quiet for a moment. "I love Thomas. I want to say that plainly so you understand it. He was a good husband and a good father, and his instincts came from the best place in him." A pause. "But he trusted the wrong people, and he didn't see what was coming until it was already there." "You saw it," Rowan said. "I saw it 6 months before he did," she said. "I tried to tell him. He listened. But he needed to believe people were better than I was giving them credit for." She looked at her hands in her lap. "He was wrong, but I understand why he needed to believe it. The world he wanted to live in was worth wanting." Rowan thought about his father's letters. About a man writing to an absent son year after year. Still hoping, still believing. "Some people are built for hoping," he said. "It's not a weakness. It's just a different kind of strength." She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. "Something unguarded. That's the kind of thing you've said since I met you," she said. "Don't get accustomed to it," he said. But she was already almost smiling. And this time he didn't stop himself from doing the same. They slept in shifts. Rowan took the first watch and sat with his rifle across his knees and listened to the backcountry and thought about Garrett Holloway. who was somewhere behind them, with enough hired men to cover multiple exits, but not enough knowledge to cover the one that mattered. 2 more days to Missoula. 2 days of keeping off the known roads, keeping to the trapper's country, keeping the documents dry and Adeline safe and himself between her and whatever was moving in the dark. He could do 2 days. He had done harder things for considerably less reason. The second day was rough going, as he'd warned her. The upper section of the eastern trail crossed a rocky escarpment that required dismounting and leading the horses by hand, picking footing carefully over ground that was still damp from the spring melt. Adeline managed it without complaint, without asking him to slow down, without any of the fragile behavior that the word alone had once conjured for him, before he understood that she had not been alone in any meaningful sense. She had been solitary, which is entirely different, and solitary people develop a self-reliance that is quietly remarkable to witness in action. They were halfway across the worst section of the escarpment when the horse behind him stumbled. Not Adeline's horse, his own. The front left hoof caught a wet stone wrong, and the animal lurched sideways. And Rowan moved on reflex, throwing his weight against the horse's shoulder to keep it from going down on the rocky slope. And in the 2 seconds of focused physical effort, he felt something pull sharply in his left side, old scar tissue from a trapping accident years ago. A wound that had never fully closed the way a man his age expected things to close. He got the horse steady. He stood straight. He breathed. "You're hurt," Adeline said from 3 feet away. She had moved toward him the moment the horse stumbled, and she was looking at his face with the diagnostic attention of a woman who had tended injuries and knew how to read them. "Old injury. You are not fine," she said. "You went gray." "I'm always that color," he said. "Rowan." She said his name the way she'd said it that first evening by the fire, plain and direct, like something that belonged in the air between them. "Show me." "We have 5 minutes," she said. "Show me, or I'll assume it's worse than you're telling me, and I'll worry about it for the next 2 days, instead of watching the trail." He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled up the left side of his shirt. The scar was substantial, along puckered line from a trapping chain that had caught him badly in the winter of 1871. It had gone infected, and he'd dealt with it alone in a trapper's hut for 2 weeks, which had been one of the less pleasant experiences of his life. The area around it was red now, the muscle beneath it tightened from the sudden strain. Adeline looked at it without flinching. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers alongside the scar with careful precision. He went still. Not because it hurt, though it did, because no one had touched him with that particular quality of attention in a very long time. "Strained muscle, not the scar," she said. "Does it pull when you breathe deep a little?" he admitted. "You need to wrap it. Do you have bandaging in your pack?" "I have cloth, that'll do." She was already moving to his horse's saddlebag. Efficient and matter-of-fact, and he stood there in the middle of a rocky escarpment in the Montana backcountry and let her find the cloth and return and wrap his ribs with a firmness and competence that told him she had done this before. "Thomas," he said, understanding without asking. Thomas had no sense about his own injuries, she said, smoothing the last layer flat with her palm. "He once rode 3 days on a broken rib because he didn't want to worry me." She stepped back. "Men have a peculiar relationship with their own pain." "That's true enough," he said. Better, he said, and meant it. She looked at him for one more moment, something crossing her face that she did not name, and that he did not ask her to name, and then she turned back to her horse and said, briskly, "Let's keep moving." They cleared the escarpment before noon. The lower country came easier after that, and by late afternoon they were on familiar enough terrain that Rowan could feel Missoula ahead of them, the way a man feels a destination not seen yet. But real, he was wrong about a second thing that day. He had believed Garrett's men were behind them. The rider came from the side from a shallow draw that ran parallel to the trail. A position that made no sense unless someone had ridden ahead and waited. Which meant someone had known the Eastern Trail, or had guessed it, or had been told. young, hard-faced, with a hand already moving toward his holster as he cleared the draw. "Hold up," the rider said. Rowan put his horse between the rider and Adeline in one smooth movement. His rifle was across his saddle. He did not raise it. "Not yet help you?" Rowan said. "Mr. Holloway wants the woman's bag," the rider said. He was trying for authority, and not quite finding it young enough that bluster was covering for uncertainty. "Hand it over and you're free to go." "That's a kind offer," Rowan said. "I'm going to decline. That ain't a request, mister." "I know it ain't," Rowan said. "But you're one man, and you're younger than the situation calls for. And I've been in this country longer than you've been alive." He looked at the rider steadily. "Garrett sent you alone?" A flicker. "Just for a second." The rider's eyes moved, left the involuntary look of a man checking where his support is. Rowan heard it then. A second horse, deeper in the draw, hung back waiting, one visible, one hidden. "Standard enough. Tell the man in the draw to come out where I can see him," Rowan said. The rider's jaw tightened. "Do it," Rowan said. "Because if he comes out after I've decided things are hostile, we're going to have a much worse conversation." A long moment. Then a second rider emerged from the draw, older, less certain than his partner, with the look of a man who had hired on for straightforward work and was now in something he hadn't fully agreed to. Two men, both uncertain, neither willing to be the one who started something they couldn't finish. Adeline spoke from behind Rowan's shoulder. "I know your names," she said. Both riders looked at her. "James Coley and Pete Rourke," she said. "You've both worked for Garrett Holloway for 3 years. You're both in the ledger." She paused. "Not as perpetrators. As witnesses, I documented what you saw, not what you did. If you walk away right now, that distinction stays in place." Another pause. "If you don't walk away, I'll make sure the federal marshal understands you were active participants." "It's a different charge." Silence. The older rider, Pete Rourke, looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at James Coley. Something passed between them. "Garrett didn't tell us what was in that bag," Pete said. "He just said to get it." "I know he didn't," Adeline said. "He doesn't tell people more than he has to. That's how he operates." Another silence. "Longer we got families," Pete said. It wasn't a threat or a negotiation. It was a simple statement of the complication. "I know that, too," Adeline said. "Which is why your names are in the witness column." Pete Rourke looked at Rowan. Man to man, one calculation to another, Rowan said nothing. He simply waited, his hand on his rifle, his posture completely still, giving the man the space to make the only decision that made sense. Pete turned his horse. James Coley followed, half a second behind. They rode back into the draw and kept riding, and the sound of their horses faded south. Away from Missoula, away from Garrett, away from all of it. The silence they left behind was enormous. Adeline let out a breath that she'd been holding since she'd started talking. "You knew their names," Rowan said. "I told you," she said. "I documented everything. You bluffed about the charges." "Did I?" she said. "Or did I just remind them that they had a choice?" She straightened in the saddle. "Either way, they're gone." He looked at her, this woman who had been sitting behind him, while a man pointed toward her bag and had responded not with fear, not with silence, but with names and legal distinctions and a precise understanding of exactly what pressure to apply and exactly how much. "You're remarkable," he said. He said it the way he said everything, plainly, without embellishment, as a statement of fact rather than sentiment. She blinked, like the word had caught her off guard in a way that a rifle hadn't. "I'm practical," she said after a moment. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," he said. He urged his horse forward. She came alongside him. And for the first time since they'd left the cabin, they were riding side by side rather than one behind the other. And neither of them moved to change it. They made camp that night with one day between them and Missoula. One day between Adeline Brooks and the federal marshal's office. One day between 11 years of Garrett Holloway's corruption and the legal system that could end it. Rowan sat with his rifle and watched the dark and thought about what came after. After the marshal. After the documents were filed and the case was opened and Garrett's empire began to come apart at the carefully forged seams. He thought about Adeline going to Billings to bring Clara home. He thought about the Clearwater land and whether she could go back to it. And what home meant when you'd rebuilt it once from nothing and lost it and had to start again. He thought about his father's cabin, the repaired roof, the new door in the north wall, the coffee that didn't need stretching anymore. He thought about things he had no business thinking about. And he let himself think about them anyway, because they were one day from Missoula, and he was not the man who ran anymore. And pretending otherwise was a particular kind of dishonesty he'd decided he was done with. Adeline was asleep, which she needed genuinely, deeply asleep for the first time in 2 nights. Her face relaxed into something younger and less defended. One hand still resting on the saddlebag even in sleep. He watched the dark. He listened to the country. He thought about that moment on the escarpment, her hands, certain and careful, wrapping his ribs, her voice, saying his name, the way she'd stepped back afterward and said briskly, "Let's keep moving," as if she hadn't just done something that had shifted something in him that he'd been fairly certain couldn't be shifted anymore. An hour before dawn he heard something, not behind them, not to the sides, ahead, on the Missoula road. He was on his feet before he'd finished thinking. And then he was crouching beside Adeline with his hand on her shoulder. And she was awake and alert in the space of 2 seconds. Her hand tightening on the saddlebag. "What is it?" she breathed. "Someone's on the road ahead," he said. "Between us and Missoula." She sat up. Her eyes were completely clear. "How many?" she said. "I can't tell yet," he said. "But Adeline," he stopped. "Say it," she said. "If Garrett has men on the Missoula approach," he said, "it means someone inside the federal marshal's office is his. It means he knew we were heading there before we even left the cabin." He watched her face as she processed this. As she followed the logic to its conclusion, she got there. He could see the moment she got there. "The marshal," she said. "Maybe not the marshal himself," Rowan said, "but someone in that office. Someone who sent word to Garrett the moment someone described a woman with documents asking about filing a federal complaint." She was very still. "Hugh Pryor," she said slowly. "Hugh Pryor came to Thomas after trying to go to the marshal's office first. He told Thomas he'd gone there and been turned away. He said they hadn't believed him." Her voice was quieter now, building toward something. But what if they hadn't turned him away because they didn't believe him? What if they'd turned him away and then told Garrett what he'd brought? Rowan waited. "Garrett knew about the ledger before Hugh came to us," she said. "That's how he knew what Thomas had. That's how he knew what to look for. The marshal's office didn't fail Hugh Pryor. They betrayed him." She looked at Rowan. "I've been trying to take these documents to the one place Garrett already controls." The silence between them was complete. Then Adeline reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped stack of documents and held them against her chest and said, very quietly, "Where do we go?" Rowan looked at her. He thought about a man in the Eastern Territory, a federal circuit judge, who had come through Missoula twice in the years before Rowan left. A man with a reputation for taking cases that local authorities were too compromised to touch. A man whose circuit brought him through Billings every spring. Billings, where Clara was. He looked at Adeline. "I know where we go," he said. Billings was 3 days east, and they did not have 3 days to spare. Rowan made the calculation while the sky was still dark above them, turning the variables over with the practiced efficiency of a man who had survived years of wilderness decisions where being wrong meant not surviving. The Missoula approach was compromise that was settled. The South Pass was watched. The main road was Garrett's. What remained was the eastern route they'd already taken. Pushed further, past the edge of the valley entirely, into open country where Garrett's influence thinned out because his money had never needed to reach that far. "We ride through," he told Adeline. "Not around. We cut straight across the open basin, and we move fast, and we don't stop for anything that isn't the horsehippers breaking down." She was already rolling her bedroll. "How long?" 2.5 days if we push. 3 if we can't." He looked at her directly. "It'll be hard. You keep saying that," she said. "I keep managing." He almost said something. He stopped himself. He saddled the horses instead. They were moving before the sky showed any color at all, navigating by the particular darkness that Rowan read the way other men read print, the shapes and textures of country he'd spent years learning. Adeline stayed with him without complaint, without hesitation, her horses breathing the only sound between them for the first hour. By the time dawn broke, they were already miles from where they'd camped, crossing the edge of the basin, and the feeling of open country after days of mountain cover was almost physical in exposure. A vulnerability, the sensation of being visible in a way the trees had prevented. "Stay low," Rowan said. "Just don't sit tall. Don't give anyone on a ridge a clear outline, I know," she said. And she did know. She had been alive in dangerous country for 8 months before he arrived. She adjusted her posture without making anything of it. The first day of open riding was brutal in the way that honest hard work is brutal unadorned. Demanding, leaving no room for anything soft. They stopped twice, briefly, to water the horses and eat without dismounting. And the country rolled past them in long waves that were beautiful in the way Rowan had always found Montana beautiful and had always been too busy surviving to say so aloud. "The judge," Adeline said during one of these brief stops. "Tell me what you know about him." "His name is Elias Croft," Rowan said. "Federal circuit judge. I saw him work 2 cases in Missoula before I left. One was a land fraud case. Smaller scale than yours, but the same shape. False claim. False documents. A local authority too close to the defendant to be trustworthy." He handed her his water canteen. "Croft didn't care about who was comfortable. He cared about what the evidence said. That's what I need," she said. "That's what you've got," he said. "Assuming he's in Billings. When does his circuit bring him through?" "Late spring. Early summer, historically. We're inside that window." He looked at her. "We may get lucky." "We've been lucky 3 times already," she said. The door in the north wall. The riders who turned back. The road ahead last night turning out to be 2 men on a supply run instead of Garrett's people. She handed the canteen back. "How much luck do you think we're carrying?" "Enough," he said. He meant it as a simple statement. Something about the way she looked at him when he said it told him she'd taken it as something more. And he didn't correct that. They rode. The second day brought wind from the north. Cold and insistent, the kind of spring weather that Montana produced without apology, when you'd made the mistake of expecting anything predictable. Adeline wore everything she had and didn't mention it. Rowan watched her from the corner of his eye and thought about what she must have been in those 8 months alone cold. Rationed, carrying grief and fear and a little girl's future in a stack of papers on a cabin table. And choosing every single morning to keep going. He had run from less. He thought about that plainly, without flinching from it. He had run from a woman who hadn't wanted him, and a father who'd needed him, and a life that felt too full of pain to stay inside of. He had called it a decision. Adeline had called it what it was running, and she'd said it gently enough that it hadn't felt like an accusation. It had felt like someone handing him a truth he'd been avoiding carrying. "What are you thinking about?" she said. She could apparently feel him thinking. "That was a new experience." "My father," he said. "Tell me something about him," she said. "Something that isn't in the letters." He thought about it for a moment. "He could not cook a single thing successfully," he said. "Not one thing. He burned water. I am not exaggerating. He survived primarily on salt pork and the generosity of neighbors who felt sorry for him." He paused. "When my mother was alive, the kitchen was her domain, and he understood this, and was grateful. After she died, we ate a great many things that were not technically food. Adeline made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, brief and genuine and startled out of her. The laugh of someone who hadn't expected to find something funny. The sound of it did something to Rowan's chest that he did not examine too closely. Thomas was the opposite, she said when she recovered. He could cook anything. He'd grown up with 4 sisters and a mother who believed men should be capable of feeding themselves. She smiled at something private. He made a venison stew that people asked after for years. Clara used to sit on the counter and watch him. The smile held for a moment, then went softer. She hasn't a proper venison stew since October. She will again, Rowan said. Yes, Adeline said. She will. The certainty in his voice had placed itself under her words like a foundation. And she let it hold. They were an hour outside of Billings when everything nearly came apart. Not from Garrett, not from hired men or compromised marshals or any of the dangers they'd been tracking and calculating against for 3 days. It came from something smaller and more absolute. Adeline's horse went lame. The right foreleg, a stone bruise caught on a piece of rough ground, the animal beginning to favor it gradually and then suddenly very obviously. She felt it before Rowan saw it, pulling up immediately. Dismounting before he could say anything, she looked at the leg. She looked at the distance remaining. She looked at Rowan. I can double with you, she said, or I can walk. It isn't that far, we double, he said immediately. He didn't like the idea of arriving in Billings visible and slower. But he liked less the idea of Adeline walking a mile with the documents while he rode ahead. He was not leaving her side. That decision had been made somewhere in the back country 2 days ago, and he had not revisited it. She secured the lame horse to a tree with enough rope to graze. And she climbed up behind Rowan, and the horse adjusted to the weight of 2 people without complaint. And they rode the last hour into Billings with her arms around his waist, and neither of them saying anything about it. He was aware of every point of contact. He kept his eyes on the road. Billings had the particular energy of a territory town that was becoming something else, the edge of civilization pressing in from both sides. The old ways and the new ones arguing in the width of every street. They came in from the western approach, unremarkable. Dusty 2 people on a tired horse, and Rowan kept their pace even and their path direct. My sister's house first, Adeline said. I know, he said. The address was one she'd carried in her head for 8 months. A house on the east side of town, modest, well kept, belonging to a woman named Ruth Alcott who had Adeline's same quality of stillness. Rowan noticed when she opened the door and saw her sister standing in front of her. Ruth's face moved through about 6 things in 2 seconds. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around Adeline without speaking. And Adeline held on with the particular grip of someone who has been not holding on for a very long time. Rowan stood back. He was good at standing back after a moment. Adeline pulled away and looked at her sister's face. Clara, she's fine, Ruth said. She's wonderful. She's been asking for you every day. A pause, her eyes moving to Rowan over Adeline's shoulder. Who is this? The man who owns my cabin, Adeline said. And a great deal more than that at this point. She turned. Rowan Mercer, my sister Ruth Alcott. Ruth looked at him with the evaluating look of a woman who loves her sister and has been worrying about her for 8 months and wants to understand exactly what she's looking at. He met her gaze directly and said, "Ma'am," and nothing else. Because he'd learned that in moments like this, less was considerably more. Something in Ruth's expression settled slightly, not fully, but slightly. "Come inside," she said. Adeline found Clara in the back room, playing with a set of carved wooden animals that Ruth's husband had made her. The little girl looked up, and her face did the thing that children's faces do when the person they've been waiting for finally arrives, a total, undone, absolute joy that had nothing complicated about it. "Mama." Adeline was on her knees in 2 steps. She held her daughter with both arms, and her eyes were closed and her face was doing everything she'd kept it from doing for 8 months. And Rowan, standing in the doorway, turned away and looked at the wall, because some moments do not belong to observers. He gave them 10 minutes. Then he found Ruth in the kitchen and said, "I need to know if Judge Elias Croft is in Billings." Ruth looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because your sister has federal evidence of land fraud and murder, and we need to get it in front of a judge who isn't owned by the man responsible." He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said things that were urgent and true. "Is Croft here?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "His circuit came through 4 days ago. He's staying at the Billings Hotel until Friday." A pause. "That's the day after tomorrow." "Then we have tomorrow," Rowan said. When Adeline came back out, Clara was on her hip, a small warm weight that Adeline carried with the ease of muscle memory, the body knowing exactly how to hold this particular person. Clara looked at Rowan with the frank, undefended curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Who?" Clara said. "My name's Rowan," he said. "Do you know my mama?" "I do," he said. Clara considered this with great seriousness. "She's been gone a very long time," she said. "I know it," he said. "She's been working very hard." "Is she done working now?" He looked at Adeline. She looked back at him, and for a moment the question hung between them in a way that was about more than Clara had intended it to be. "Almost," Adeline said. That night, Ruth made a proper meal, the first real meal Rowan had eaten since before the cabin, and they sat at Ruth's kitchen table, and Adeline told her sister everything while Clara slept in the next room. Ruth listened the way a good listener does, without interrupting, without minimizing, her face moving through the story as it was told. When Adeline finished, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Rowan. "You've been with her the whole time," Ruth said. "Since she left the cabin?" "Yes," he said. "You didn't have to be," Ruth said. "It wasn't your fight." He looked at his coffee cup. "It became mine," he said. Ruth looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded, the single nod of a woman who has assessed something and reached a conclusion she's satisfied with. "The documents," she said to Adeline. "Where are they?" "Here." Adeline placed the saddlebag on the table. "I need tonight to organize them for presentation in the order the judge will need to read them, with the summary first and the supporting evidence behind it." "I'll help," Ruth said. Rowan stood. "I'm going to find the Billings Hotel," he said. "Find out Croft's schedule tomorrow. Whether he's accessible." Adeline looked up. "Be careful. If Garrett has anyone in this town, I know," he said. He picked up his coat. He looked at her for a moment, sitting at her sister's table with her daughter sleeping in the next room, and the documents spread in front of her. Exhausted and purposeful, and exactly where she needed to be. "I'll be back in an hour." "Rowan," she waited. "Be careful," she said again. But she said it differently this time. Not as a strategy point. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. He went out. The hotel concierge was forthcoming enough to a man who asked about the judge's schedule in the manner of a rancher with legal business, which Rowan technically was. Judge Croft was seeing petitioners from 9 to noon the following day in a meeting room the hotel maintained for exactly this purpose. He was, as Ruth had said, leaving Friday one window. 9 to noon. Rowan was back at Ruth's house in 40 minutes. He told them. Adeline nodded without looking up from the documents she was organizing, her hands moving through the pages with the focused fluency of someone who has handled them so many times they've become extensions of thought. "We'll be there at 9, she said. He had one more thing to do before he slept. He sat down at Ruth's writing table and wrote a letter. He wrote it carefully, in the plain and direct language that he used for everything important, and he addressed it to the county recorder's office in Missoula and the federal land office in Helena simultaneously. The letter documented what he knew as a property owner in the Northern Valley, the approach by Garrett Holloway, the offer to purchase, the timeline, and the specific language Garrett had used, and it noted that he had reason to believe the Missoula Federal Marshal's office had been compromised and requested the letter be forwarded to the Helena Circuit Court instead. He gave it to Ruth to send by morning post before they left. It was not the primary action. The primary action was Adeline's documents. Adeline's case, Adeline's 11 years of evidence. But it was a second thread in case the first one was somehow cut. He had learned from watching Adeline's meticulous documentation that the answer to a corrupt system was never one point of pressure. It was many, applied simultaneously, from directions the opponent did not expect. He slept 3 hours on Ruth's parlor floor and woke before dawn feeling better than he had any right to. The morning had a particular quality, the held-breath feeling of a day that knows something significant is going to happen in it. Adeline was already up, already dressed, the documents in the saddlebag in their final order. She had dark circles under her eyes and a composure that he recognized now as not just strength, but the specific quality of a woman who has decided what she was going to do and has simply become the doing of it. Clara was awake, and wanting her mother and Ruth managed this with the practiced skill of someone who had been managing it for months. "I'll be back before supper," Adeline told Clara. "I promise. You always come back?" Clara asked. It was not entirely a question. "I always come back," Adeline said. She kissed her daughter's forehead and stood up and did not look back. Because looking back would have made it harder, and she needed to be completely present for what came next. They walked to the Billings Hotel. Rowan carried the saddlebag. Adeline walked beside him, straight-spined, unhurried. Composed in the way of someone who is prepared so thoroughly that the event itself is almost a formality. Almost. The meeting room was plain and well lit, with a long table and several chairs and a man behind them who was smaller than Rowan had remembered and sharper-eyed. Elias Croft was in his 60s, with the careful economical manner of someone who had learned long ago that words were precision instruments and should be used accordingly. He looked at them when they entered. He looked at the saddlebag. "You're not on my schedule," he said. "No, sir," Adeline said. "I apologize for that. My name is Adeline Brooks. My late husband was Thomas Brooks, who owned the Clearwater land parcel in the northern Montana Valley. I have 11 years of documented evidence of federal land fraud, falsified claim documents, and the murder of my husband by a man named Garrett Holloway. I also have evidence suggesting the Missoula Federal Marshal's office has been compromised." She set the saddlebag on the table in front of him. "I need 1 hour of your time." Croft looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Rowan. "Who?" he said. "Rowan Mercer," he said. "I own the property adjacent to the Clearwater parcel. Garrett Holloway approached me directly to purchase it 3 weeks ago. I declined. When I made clear I wouldn't sell, he sent armed men to my property before dawn." He paused. "I have a letter filed this morning with the land office in Helena, documenting the approach and the timeline." Croft looked back at Adeline. "Sit down, Mrs. Brooks," he said. She sat. He opened the saddlebag. What happened in the next hour was not dramatic in the way that dramatic things usually present themselves. It was quiet and methodical and precise, Croft reading, Adeline explaining, Rowan watching the judge's face and reading it the way he read country. Looking for the things that mattered. What he saw in Croft's face was not sympathy. Sympathy would have been almost worthless. What he saw was recognition, the specific recognition of a man who understands legal architecture, looking at a structure that is exactly as solid as it appears to be. Croft asked 14 questions. Adeline answered everyone without hesitation, without qualifying, without anything that smelled like uncertainty. She walked him through the ledger, through the forged transfer documents, through Hugh Pryor's testimony letter, through the chronology of offers and refusals and Thomas's death, and the sheriff's inadequate notation. When she finished, Croft sat back and looked at the table. "The Missoula Marshal," he said. "You have specific evidence of his involvement?" "Not direct evidence of his involvement," she said. "I have evidence that suggests a leak from that office. Hugh Pryor, the witness who provided the ledger, attempted to file a complaint there before coming to my husband. He was turned away. Within weeks, Garrett demonstrated knowledge of the ledger's contents. She met Croft's eyes. I cannot prove the connection in this room, but I can demonstrate it is more likely than the alternative. You've thought about this carefully, Croft said. I've had 8 months to think about nothing else, she said. Another silence. Mrs. Brooks, Croft said. I need to tell you something about how this proceeds. He folded his hands on the table. Filing this case through my circuit means it goes to Helena, not Missoula. It means federal jurisdiction, not territorial. It means Garrett Holloway cannot reach the proceeding through his local connections. He paused. It also means it will take time. Federal cases move slowly. You should not expect resolution in weeks. I've been patient for 11 years, she said. I can manage months. Croft looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the particular deliberate care of a man who does not make statements he cannot back. This evidence is sufficient to open a federal investigation and issue a warrant for Garrett Holloway's assets pending trial. He began writing. I will also be writing to the Attorney General's office regarding the Missoula situation. He looked up. Can you remain in Billings while I verify the initial chain of documents? 4 days, perhaps 5. My daughter is here, Adeline said. Yes. Croft nodded. He signed something. He handed Adeline a document of formal receipt of evidence. The case number already assigned, his signature at the bottom. She held it with both hands. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not cry. She had held herself together through 8 months and 3 days of hard riding, and men with guns and a compromised marshal's office and a lame horse and every other thing the world had placed in front of her. And she held herself together now in this plain room, holding the piece of paper that meant it had not been for nothing. But her hands were not entirely steady. Rowan was sitting beside her. Without making anything of it, without announcing it, he put his hand over hers on the document. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just a steady, warm, certain weight that said, I see what this cost. I see what you did. You can stop holding so tight now. She looked at him. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Not to Croft. To him. Nothing to thank me for, he said. Just as quietly. There is, she said. There is everything to thank you for. He didn't answer that. But he didn't move his hand. Croft was already writing. Already moving. Already building the legal architecture that would take Garrett Holloway apart piece by carefully documented piece. He paused once, looking up, and saw the two of them at his table, the woman with the documents and the mountain man with his hand over hers, and something crossed his face that was not quite professional and not quite personal. Something that recognized what it was looking at. He looked back at his writing. I'll need you here at 9 tomorrow morning, he said. Both of you, if you're willing, Mr. Mercer. We'll be here, Rowan said. They walked back to Ruth's house in the mid-morning light. Side by side, not touching now, not needing to. The saddlebag was lighter. Not physically, the documents were all there, receipted and catalogued, and now part of a federal proceeding, but in the way carried things become lighter when you finally set them down in the right place. Adeline was quiet for a block. Then she said, I don't know what I'm going to do now. You don't have to know today, he said. I know that, she said. I just for 8 months the only thought was forward. The next step, the next document, the next day. Get to the judge. Get Clara home. She walked another few steps. And now the judge has the case and Clara is home, and I'm standing in Billings in a dress that has seen better decades, and I genuinely don't know what comes next. The Clearwater land is yours, he said. Legally. When Garrett's claims are voided, the title reverts. You'd have the spring, the pastures, everything, Thomas. I know, she said. I'm not sure I can live there. I said that before. You did, he said. You don't have to. Then where she said it without self-pity. Just genuinely, the question of a woman who has been so focused on one thing for so long that the world beyond it has gone blurry. He was quiet for a moment. "There's a cabin," he said carefully. "North of the valley. It's had some work done to it recently. New roof, reinforced walls, a door in the north side that most people don't know about." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "It's not much, but it's solid, and it belongs to someone who would not object to a second opinion on what it could be." Adeline stopped walking. He stopped, too, because she had, and turned to look at her. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, not the composure, not the strategic calm, not the grief worn into steadiness. Something open, something that had not yet decided what to do with itself, but was not afraid of existing. "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "I know it is," he said. "I said it anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he felt it across his skin. "I need time," she said. "Not forever. But I have time," he said. "I bought a cabin. I'm not going anywhere." Something came into her face then, the beginning of something that had no name yet, but would, given time, grow into one. "All right," she said. She started walking again. He walked beside her, behind them in the Helena Circuit Court files being assembled that very hour. The case against Garrett Holloway was already alive. The warrant was already being drafted. In the Northern Valley, Garrett's men were reporting back to a man who did not yet know that the woman he had underestimated had already won, that the fight he thought was still in front of him was already decided. In a plain meeting room in Billings, by 11 years of careful documentation and 6 days of refusal to quit. And in Ruth Alcott's kitchen, a little girl named Clara was eating breakfast and asking when her mother was coming home and being told, soon, any minute now. She was right. The 4 days in Billings were the strangest of Rowan Mercer's life. Not because they were hard. The hard part was over. Or at least the hard part he had been trained by 11 years of wilderness living to recognize as hard the physical danger. The decisions made at speed, the weight of someone else's survival inside his own hands. That kind was over. What replaced it was something he had no established muscle for. Something that required a completely different kind of steadiness. He spent his mornings at the Billings Hotel with Adeline and Judge Croft, working through the verification process that the federal case required Rowan answering questions about his own observations as a property owner, providing the timeline of his purchase and Garrett's approach, signing documents that he read carefully before touching a pen to them because he was his father's son in at least that one regard. He spent his afternoons doing what needed doing, finding a veterinarian for Adeline's lame horse, arranging a proper stable, locating a dry goods store where he bought Adeline a dress that was not in ruins, leaving it on Ruth's porch without explanation because he did not want to make a performance of it. Ruth found him doing this and looked at him with those evaluating eyes she'd been pointing at him since he arrived. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" he said. "I don't know exactly," she said. "Someone louder." "Maybe. Most men who do something significant want people to know they did it." "I didn't do anything significant," he said. "Your sister did the significant thing. I just stayed alongside it." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "She hasn't let anyone stay alongside her in a very long time," she said. "Not since Thomas. She stopped trusting that people would hold." "I know," he said. "She doesn't say it," Ruth said. "But I know my sister, I know," he said again. "She doesn't need to say it. It's visible in how she operates. She double-checks everything. She anticipates problems before they arrive. She doesn't ask for help until she's already worked out 3 ways to manage without it." He picked up his hat. "That's not a criticism. That's what keeping yourself alive looks like when you've learned that depending on someone can cost you everything." Ruth looked at him for a long time. "You see her," she said. It was the entirety of what she meant. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He walked away before the conversation could become anything more complicated than it already was. Clara had decided, in the direct and absolute manner of 5-year-olds, that she liked Rowan. She had reached this conclusion on the second day based on evidence that was entirely her own. He had fixed a wheel on her toy cart without being asked, using a piece of wire from his saddlebag, working quietly while she watched. And when he handed it back to her, he said, "Good as new." And she had tested it thoroughly and declared it better than new, actually, and that had apparently settled something for her. After that, she talked to him with the uninhibited candor that children reserve for people they've decided to trust, telling him about her wooden animals and her best friend in Billings and the way she liked her eggs in the morning and what her papa used to do on Sunday afternoons. Rowan listened to all of it. On the third day, Clara climbed into the chair beside him while he was going over documents at Ruth's table and said, without preamble, "Are you going to stay with my mama?" He set down his pen. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That's something your mama and I need to talk about." "I think you should," Clara said. "Do you?" he said. "She smiles more when you're there," Clara said. She didn't smile much before. Auntie Ruth says she forgot how. She arranged her wooden horse and cow side by side with great precision. I don't think she forgot. I think she just stopped having a reason. Rowan looked at this small, serious child who had her mother's eyes and her mother's particular quality of seeing straight to the center of things. "You're very perceptive," he said. "Mama says that too," Clara said. "I don't know what it means, but I think it's good." "It's good," he confirmed. He picked his pen back up. Clara stayed in the chair beside him and arranged her animals in various configurations and did not bother him further, apparently satisfied that the conversation had concluded satisfactorily. On the third evening, Croft sent word that the initial verification was complete, that the warrant for Garrett Holloway's assets had been signed and dispatched to a federal marshal in Helena, not Missoula, and that the case was formally open. He also informed them, through a short and precisely worded note, that a separate inquiry into the Missoula Federal Marshal's office had been initiated at the Attorney General's level, which was above and beyond what either of them had asked for, and which meant that someone in Helena had looked at the documentation and understood immediately what it represented. Adeline read the note at Ruth's kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed, slowly, all the way in and all the way out. Rowan sat across from her. He waited. "It's done," she said. "Not finished, the case will take months." "But it's done." "Yes," he said. "He can't stop it now," she said. "Even if she stopped. Even if something happened to me. The case is federal. The documents are in federal custody. The warrant is issued." Her voice was completely steady. "He cannot make this disappear." "No," Rowan said. "He cannot." She looked at the note for another moment. Then she looked up at him, and whatever had been held behind her eyes for the entirety of the time he'd known her, the discipline, the composure, the absolute refusal to let the cost of all of this show in a way that might compromise her ability to keep moving, some of it released. Not all of it. She was still Adeline Brooks, and that was not a woman who came apart. But some of it released, and what was underneath was something quieter and more complicated and more real than the strength she'd been showing him. "I'm tired." Simply. "I know," he said. "I don't mean tonight. I mean, I have been tired for a year. I have been tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And I kept going because I had to keep going, and now I don't have to keep going in quite the same way, and I don't entirely know what to do with that." "You rest," he said. "That's what you do." "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," he said. She looked at him with expression that was almost exasperated and almost grateful, and was entirely genuine. "You make it sound simple," he said. "Not easy, but simple," she almost laughed. He could see it move through her and not quite arrive. "You are the most uncomplicated man I have ever met," she said. "I'll take that," he said. This time she did laugh. It was quiet and brief and entirely real, and it was the sound that told him more than anything else had. More than all of it, that she was going to be all right. Not the documents or the warrant or Croft's signed note. This sound, Right here, in Ruth Alcott's kitchen, in the particular exhale of a woman who has finally set down the thing she's been carrying. He would not forget it. On the morning they were set to leave Billings. Before Adeline and Clara rode east with Ruth to see about getting the Clearwater land properly retitled. And before Rowan rode back north to the cabin in the Bitterroots. They sat together on Ruth's porch in the early light and drank real coffee not stretched. Not thin, real coffee, and said almost nothing for a long while. Clara was inside with Ruth, eating breakfast with the appetite of a child who had decided the world was a manageable place. "I've been thinking about what you said," Adeline said eventually. "About the cabin. I figured you had been," he said. "I need to see the Clearwater land first," she said. "I need to stand on it and understand whether I can go back to it or whether it's too much of Thomas in a way I can't live inside." She looked at her coffee cup. "Clear should know her father's land. Whether or not we live there, she should know it." "That's right," Rowan said. "And I need time," she said. "I told you that," he said. "I told you I had time, you did." She looked at him. "I'm testing whether you meant it." "Test it as long as you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, Adeline. I came back to that valley and I found something I didn't expect, and I'm not in the habit of walking away from significant things." He met her eyes directly. "Not anymore." She held his gaze for a moment. The morning light was doing what morning light does. And she looked tired and capable and real in it, nothing softened or idealized. Just the actual woman who had pointed a rifle at his chest in a cold cabin and said, "You finally came," and meant something by it, that they were only now beginning to understand together. "Come north in September," she said. "Give me the summer, September," he said. "Bring proper coffee," she said. "Not the kind I was stretching." "I'll bring a full pound," he said. "Two," she said. "Two," he agreed. And that was the arrangement. Plain and unadorned and entirely sufficient for two people who had both learned, the hard way, that what mattered was not the declaration but the showing up. Not the promise but the presence. He rode north the next morning. What he didn't know, what no one told him, and what would reach him 6 weeks later in a letter from Ruth Alcott, was what happened the morning after he left. What happened when word finally reached the Northern Valley that a federal warrant had been issued. That Garrett Holloway's assets were frozen pending trial. That 2 sheriffs were being investigated by the Attorney General's office. And that the name on the evidence filing was Adeline Brooks, widow, formerly of the Clearwater land. Garrett Holloway had received this news in his own parlor, delivered by a man from Helena who was not there with options. He had sat with it for a long moment. Then he had said something that the man from Helena repeated to Judge Croft, who included it in his case notes, which eventually became part of the public record. What Garrett said was, "I should have known. The woman in the cabin, not the mountain man with the deed. Not the trapper who'd built a door in the north wall and positioned his horses in the dark and ridden 3 days through backcountry to Billings. Not Rowan Mercer, who had stood between Garrett's hired men and the only person who could end his empire. The woman in the cabin, the woman he had dismissed as insignificant. The woman he had assumed would starve or freeze or lose her nerve or simply stop. Because women like her women, who didn't fit the shape of what men like Garrett expected strength to look like, were supposed to stop. She had not stopped. She had waited 8 months and organized 11 years of evidence and survived a Montana winter alone and walked calmly into a federal judge's meeting room and set a saddlebag on the table and said, "I need 1 hour," and that hour had been enough. When Rowan read Ruth's letter, sitting in the repaired cabin in the Bitterroots on a late July morning, he read the part about Garrett's words and he sat with it for a long time. Then he folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket next to his father's letters. Because it belonged there. Because it was part of the same story, the story of people who underestimated the wrong woman, and the cost of that mistake, and the way the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, regardless of how carefully powerful men try to keep it buried. He wrote back to Ruth the same day, a short letter. because he was a man of short letters, asking her to tell Adeline two things. First, that the cabin roof had held through a July storm that would have had the old version of it in pieces on the floor. Second, that he had ordered 2 pounds of good coffee from the merchant in Missoula and was holding them for September. Ruth wrote back 10 days later. Her letter was equally short. She says she knows it read, "About the roof. She's been asking about the weather up there. And she says September is still the plan, but she may come early." He read that twice. He went out and checked the condition of the north wall, which was solid, and the new door in it, which was functional and well fitted, and the lean-to, where there was currently room for 1 horse but could, without significant effort, be expanded to accommodate 2. He expanded it the following week, not as a declaration. As a practical matter, because he thought ahead, and because he was not the man who ran anymore, and because some things simply needed doing before they needed explaining. August came and went in the particular golden way that Montana August moved, long and warm and unhurried, the light lasting longer than anywhere else he'd known. The evenings carrying a quality that the harshest winters of the same place could not entirely erase from a person's memory. He was splitting wood on a Wednesday morning in the last week of August when he heard horses on the trail below. He set down the axe. 2 horses, one larger, one smaller, moving at an easy pace, unhurried, like people who knew where they were going and were not afraid of arriving. He walked to the edge of the clearing. Adeline came up the trail first, sitting straight in the saddle, wearing a dress that was not in ruins. Her dark hair pinned back, her face carrying a quality it had not carried the last time he'd seen her, something settled. Something that had been placed down and had not been picked back up. She looked like a woman who had stood on her husband's land and made peace with it, and then made a decision and was now moving toward that decision, without ambiguity. Clara was behind her on a small, sturdy horse, looking around the clearing with the wide-open interest of a child encountering something new and finding it immediately acceptable. Adeline pulled up in front of him. She looked at him for a moment. "You expanded the lean-to," she said. "Practical matter," he said. "Is it?" she said. "Had an extra horse in mind," he said. "Possibly 2. Clara had already dismounted and was examining the cabin exterior with great thoroughness, touching the new chinking in the north wall with one small finger. "This is different," Clara announced. "I repaired it," Rowan said. "It's better," Clara decided. She moved to the door and tried it, found it open smoothly, and went inside with the confidence of someone conducting an inspection she has authority over. Adeline watched her daughter disappear through the door. Then she looked back at Rowan. "The Clearwater land," she said. "I stood on it. I walked every inch of it. I stood at the spring where Thomas used to sit in the evenings." A pause. "It's good land. Beautiful land. Clara should know it." But she stopped. "It's his land," she said. "It belongs to his memory and his work and the life we built there, and I want Clara to carry that. Always." She met his eyes. "I thought I was going to be able to. I thought I needed to go back and reclaim it in some way. But what I understood standing there is that reclaiming it legally was enough. I don't need to live inside it to honor it." "No," he said. "You don't. I've been talking to a family in the valley," she said. "Good people. They want to work the land on shares half the yield to Clara's name in trust until she's of age. The spring stays in our title. The pastures get worked and kept." She straightened slightly. "Thomas's land will be producing and protected. Clara will have something real to come into when she's grown." "That's well done," he said. And meant it fully. "I thought so," she said, and then, more quietly, "I've been thinking about what I need now. Not what Clara needs, not what Thomas's memory needs. What I need. I need somewhere that's mine," she said. "Not inherited from grief. Not built on someone else's foundation. Somewhere I chose." She looked at the cabin behind him, the repaired roof, the solid walls, the north side door that nobody else knew about. And I need someone who thinks ahead, she said. Someone who builds doors and walls before they're needed. Someone who positions the horses in the dark and doesn't announce it. Because the doing of it is what matters and not the credit. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm not a simple man to know, he said. I want to be honest about that. I have years of habits that aren't easily broken. I run quiet. I'm better with decisions than I am with words. I have 11 years of being alone built into how I move through the world. I know all of that, she said. You've had 3 months to consider it, he said. I mean it as real information, not modesty. Rowan. She said his name the way she'd always said it, plain. Direct, like something that belonged in the room. I spent 8 months alone in this cabin. I know exactly what I'm walking back into, a beat. And I know exactly what's different about it now. He looked at her. This woman who had aimed a rifle at his chest and called it a greeting. Who had organized 11 years of evidence in a cold cabin and survived a Montana winter and ridden 3 days through backcountry without once asking him to slow down. Who had walked into a federal judge's office and set a saddlebag on the table and changed the entire shape of a valley's future. Who had stood on her dead husband's land and grieved it properly and then turned around and chosen something new. You came early, he said. I did, she said. You September? I did, he said. It's August, she said. She held his gaze. Not performing anything. Not managing anything. Just looking at him the way someone looks when they've made a decision they're fully at peace with. He reached up and took hold of her horse's bridle, steadying the animal, and looked up at her. Well, he said. You're here now. I'm here now, she said, and she dismounted. Inside the cabin, Clara had apparently completed her inspection and reached her verdict, because her voice came through the open door clearly and without ambiguity. Mama, she called out. This place is good, I like it. Can we stay? Adeline looked at Rowan, he looked back at her. Can we, she said, quietly, just for the two of them. He picked up her saddlebag from where she'd let it fall and carried it toward the door. You already stayed, he said. 8 months ago. I'm just catching up. She walked through the door ahead of him, into the cabin that had her fingerprints on every surface, the organized shelves. The careful wood stack, the years of survival and patience and refusal built into the very air of the place, and Rowan followed her in and set the bag down and went to build up the fire. Because the evening was coming, and it would be cold, and there were people here who needed warmth, and he was, finally and without reservation, the man who provided it. Garrett Holloway stood trial 8 months later in a Helena federal courtroom. The case took 11 days. The evidence, every document, every ledger entry, every forged land claim, every letter from Hugh Pryor, who was found alive in Oregon and brought back to testify, was presented with a clarity and organization that the prosecuting attorney later described as the most thorough evidentiary package he had encountered in 20 years of federal practice. Garrett was convicted on 14 counts. Both sheriffs were removed from office. The Missoula federal marshal resigned before the inquiry completed. The Northern Valley's land titles were reviewed and corrected. 8 families received land they had not known was theirs. The Clearwater Spring legally, permanently, irrevocably belonged to Clara Brooks. When the verdict came, Adeline was standing in the kitchen of the repaired cabin in the Bitterroots, teaching Clara to make biscuits. Rowan was on the roof, replacing a section of shingle he'd been meaning to get to since spring. A rider came up the trail with the news from a neighbor who'd gotten word from town. Adeline listened to the rider deliver the message. She thanked him. She watched him go back down the trail. She went to the door. Rowan, she called up. I heard, he said. He'd heard the word verdict and filled in the rest from her voice. She went back inside. She looked at the biscuit dough on the counter. She looked at her daughter, who was pressing her small hands into the dough with enormous seriousness. Mama, Clara said. No, Adeline said. And she wasn't. Quite. Keep pressing like I showed you. Clara pressed. Is it good news? It's the best news, Adeline said. Clara considered this. Does it mean everything is safe now? Adeline thought about a cabin in October. About 8 months of rationed firewood. About a stack of documents on a table and a rifle raised at a stranger's chest, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has decided that the truth deserves to exist in the world, regardless of the cost of making it. She thought about a door in a north wall, about 2 pounds of good coffee, about a man who thought ahead and didn't announce it and showed up in September when she came in August and simply said, "You're here now," like there was never any question about what that meant. "Yes, baby," she said. "It means everything is safe now." She pressed her hands into the dough beside her daughter's hands. And outside, Rowan came down from the roof, and she heard his boots on the porch. And the door opened, and he was there, the same way he had been there through all of it, steady. Present, thinking 3 steps ahead, not announcing himself. Just there. She looked at him over Clara's head. He looked back at her. No performance, no ceremony. Just 2 people in a cabin in the Montana mountains who had, separately, believed they were done and had found, in the space between a rifle barrel and a deed for $1, something neither of them had planned for and both of them had needed. The woman who had refused to disappear, the man who had finally come home, and the life they built together in that repaired, stubborn $1 cabin that everyone else had written off as worthless. It was not a fairy tale, and it was not without difficulty, and it was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves. It was better than that. It was real. It was chosen. It was earned by every hard mile and every carefully documented page, and every morning they had both gotten up and decided, without fanfare, to keep going. That is the only kind of love worth having, the kind that has looked at the worst of things and decided to stay anyway. The kind that builds a door in a wall before anyone knows they'll need it. The kind that comes back, not when it's easy, but when it matters. Adeline Brooks was never waiting to be saved. She was waiting for someone finally brave enough to deserve her. And on the day Rowan Mercer pushed open that rotting cabin door and found her rifle aimed at his chest, she had, without either of them knowing it yet, already found him.